students participating in this research paper competition for your painstaking effort and sacrifices to produce the outputs that you will be sharing with us in a little while. Your outputs will further enrich the body of knowledge on health science. I also extend my appreciation and thanks to the members of the panel of evaluators for this session, as well as to the session managers and moderator who will be facilitating and managing this activity. Let me also convey our collective gratitude to the DOST Philippine Council for Health Research and Development for its constant support to our health research initiatives in the regions. Let me thank our tireless and enormously supportive PCHRD counterparts in the organizing committee, most especially Ms. Paula Jane De Leon and her team. This celebration would not have been possible. PCHRD has been consistently and generously providing support not only to our operational expenses, but also for funding assistance such as this PNHRS Week celebration. And before I finally end, let me again remind my colleagues in the Central Luzon Health R&D Consortium of our serious responsibilities as host of this celebration. This is a vital and prestigious job for the consortium, and so I exhort each one of you not only to support the celebration, but to be actively involved and to contribute your time, your treasures, and your talents so that we can all be proud later of the outcome of this national event that was held in our region. Let us all do our share in ensuring the success of this activity in our region. Thank you, and may we have a lively, meaningful, and productive morning. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat.
Thank you, Mr. Sibal, for your message and warm welcome. To give everyone an overview on today's activity, let me read to you the contest guidelines and the criteria for judging. The following are the rules for the presentation. The slide deck submitted to the DOST PCHRD Secretariat is final and will be presented during the contest proper. The number of slides must be limited to 20 and must not have any slide transitions, animations, or movement of any description. Additional electronic media such as sound and video files are not permitted. Props such as costumes, musical instruments, laboratory equipment are also not permitted. The principal investigator must be the presenter during the contest proper. Presentations are limited to a maximum of 15 minutes. Competitors exceeding 15 minutes will have deductions on their final scores. Presentations are considered to have commenced when a presenter starts their presentation through speech. Finalists must open their cameras and shall maintain eye contact with the panel of judges and audience by looking into the camera while speaking. The researcher should refrain mentioning or acknowledging information which would reveal the identity of the institution or region they represent. There will be a 10-minute question and answer session after each presentation. After completing all the presentations, an en banc deliberation among the Board of Judges will be conducted to determine the top 3 entries. The decision of the Board of Judges is final. Our finalists for today will be judged based on the following criteria. 40% for the presentation, which refers to the understandability and concise reporting within the given time frame. 35% for the format presentation, which is the clear description of the research and the adherence to the prescribed format. And 25% for the researcher's knowledge on the project, communication skills, and responses to the judges' queries, which giving us a total of 100%. Okay, so for this morning, we have 6 interesting studies for presentation to be evaluated by our distinguished panel of judges. So let me introduce to you the members of the panel. Our first judge finished his Bachelor of Science, Master of Arts, and Doctor of Philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin with specializations on health promotion and fitness, health behavior, and health education. He is a recipient of the Balik He is a recipient of the Balik Scientist Award and a visiting scientist of mental health of PCHRD. He is also a visiting professor of public health for several higher education institutions in the Philippines, namely the Angeles University Foundation, Ateneo de Manila University, De La Salle University, Silliman University, University of San Agustin, University of the Assumption, and the University of the Philippines. Currently, he is an associate professor and the vice chair of the Department of Socio-Medical Sciences at the Columbia Mailman School of Public Health. So let us welcome our first judge, Dr. Christian T. Gloria. Our second judge is a physician by profession, but also a teacher and a social development worker at heart. She finished her Doctor of Medicine at the Far Eastern University, Nicanor Reyes Memorial Medical Foundation, and her Master of Science in Community Health and Health Management for Developing Countries at the University of Heidelberg Medical Faculty in Germany. Currently, she is the Senior Technical Advisor of ThinkWell, a health systems development organization focused on helping countries to achieve universal health coverage. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Maria Euphemia Yap. And our last judge can be considered a pillar of epidemiology. She finished her Master of Public Health degree at the University of the Philippines, her Master of Science and PhD in Epidemiology at the University of California, Los Angeles, USA. She has extensive work experience as an educator, researcher, administrator, and a recipient of several honors and awards. Currently, she is a professor emeritus at the College of Public Health of UP Manila, a special advisor of the National Task Force Against COVID-19, and the president of the Symmetrics Research Consultancy Company. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome the chair of the panel of judges, Dr. Ofelia P. Saniel. Okay, so a warm round of virtual applause to our panel of judges. So before we start, so reminders to our panelists and judges. So there will be a timer flashed in your screen. So kindly refer to this timer during the presentation and the Q&A. Okay, so I hope that all our finalists are ready. We shall now begin with our first presenter, Miss Maydel Joyce B. Castro. Miss Castro recently earned her degree in computer science and received the Latin honor cum laude. Together with her co-authors, she won the Best Thesis Award at the College Research and Development Forum and came in first runner-up at the University R&D Forum. She also has a small online apparel shop that she relies on to support her academic pursuits. Ms. Castro will present their paper titled CovFirm, a web browser plugin for COVID-19 vaccine false information detection. So Ms. Castro, are you there?
Hello.
So Ms. Castro, your 15 minutes starts now.
A pleasant day to everyone. I am here today to present our research, CoVFirm, a web browser plugin for COVID-19 vaccine false information detection. Next slide, please. Fake news during the pandemic has been a global concern. People utilize social media to learn more about the disease, how it spreads, and how to prevent it. However, it has caused an epidemic that spread fast, just like the virus, that impacts the reliability and accuracy of information being disseminated, and altering people's perception about the risk of the virus and the vaccines. Next slide. But fake news dissemination impacts not only social media platforms, but also the World Wide Web, where users have access to thousands of online sites providing both useful and potentially deceptive information. Moreover, it has been proved that vaccines are the long-term prevention of the pandemic. Yet, due to the inability to distinguish between factual and false information, there is a high rate of vaccine hesitancy among Filipino people. Next slide. Manual fact-checking process takes hours to days to review and verify information and deliver a conclusion. Thus, CoVFirm means to confirm and verify COVID vaccine information to help lessen vaccine hesitancy among the general public and reduce the mental strain of understanding scattered and unverified information on the internet. Most importantly, it can provide a great impact in overcoming vaccine hesitancy among the community, playing a big role in advocating for responsible dissemination of vaccine information on the internet. With the proper use of the plugin, such advocacies can be more extensive and effective, therefore turning hesitancy into trust. Next slide. CoVFirm's main objective is to verify the veracity of COVID-19 vaccine-related information across digital platforms and classify them as false information and factual information. Its specific objectives are as follows. First, to collect fictitious and factual information about COVID-19 vaccines and perform data cleaning, data pre-processing, and data annotation on the collected dataset. Next slide, please. Next is to implement the K-nearest neighbor, KNN, and support vector machine, SVM, algorithms, and develop a web browser plugin as a tool to classify false and factual COVID-19 vaccine information. And lastly, to compare and evaluate the performance of KNN and SVM algorithms in terms of accuracy, precision, recall, and F1 score, which will determine the performance of the tool in classifying information as factual or false. Next slide. For this study, combined methodologies of extreme programming and natural language processing were used in creating the tool. Planning for goal setting and division of tasks, designing phase for prototyping the tool and its design structure that organizes the system's logic and the user experience. Coding phase is where the researchers incorporate the natural language processing processes. Next slide. The first NLP task is data collection. Data were gathered from fact-checking websites such as PolitiFact and Snopes, from legitimate healthcare news websites, WHO and DOH, and from local news websites such as CNN Philippines and
Why would an accredited
Rappler.com.
IEC request for
Data
further
cleaning and
verification?
pre-processing includes lowercase
We are
conversion,
now trying
removing
to
punctuations, tokenization, and
regulate
stop word removal, and also stemming. Pre-processed data were then subjected to data annotation with binary labels, with 1 for factual and 0 for false. Next slide. Data training and analysis. KNN and SVM algorithms were used for model or classifier building. Following that, The model is evaluated using accuracy, precision recall, and F1 score performance metrics. Data visualization provides an accessible way for users to visualize the results obtained from the model. This task was done using Python, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS in creating the plugin. Next slide. Next is the results which are aligned with the objectives of the study. For the collection, cleaning, and pre-processing and annotation of data, the researchers have gathered total of 3,066 COVID-19 vaccine-related data after collecting it from the web. Next slide. The dataset underwent data validation in which the data are checked by a medical expert, specifically a doctor in the locality. This process is done by creating an Excel file that has three sheets containing instructions, dataset to validate, and feedback. Next slide. In connection with the second objective, KNN was fed and trained with the training and testing data. Moreover, parameters were optimized using k-fold cross-validation and grid search CV. Next slide. As for support vector machine, the process data has undergone the same train test splitting and also perform a parameter tuning using grid search cross-validation or grid search CV in order to get the best parameters C, gamma, and kernel suitable for fact-checking. Next slide, please. Moving to the comparison and evaluation of the classifications using accuracy, precision, recall, and F1 score metrics, as seen on the table, the two algorithms produced close evaluation results for category classifications, with support vector machine achieving a relatively high metric scores compared to KNN, which means that the SVM algorithm provided a more accurate classification of information, either the information is factual or false. Next slide. Now, let's take a look at the user interface of the developed plugin. After the plugin installation, it has an on and off toggle button that can enable and disable the functionalities of the plugin. Inputs are taken from the user selected text from the current active web page. When the plugin is enabled, the user can highlight a text from any selectable text element from the page of the different websites. A button is displayed near the mouse pointer after each user selection. Upon button click, the plugin is prompted to immediately process the selected data for fact-checking. After processing the input, the rating will then be displayed to the user interface. Each sentence is classified and has a corresponding and independent rating, wherein color-coded cards are shown. Green for factual rating, red for false. In some cases, the user may select incompatible or invalid inputs such as text that is not in the English language or has reached the 7-sentence input limit. In these cases, the interface will prompt an error message. All in all, the plugin provides easy access to everyone, making it easier to verify information and skipping the many steps of researching. With this, we help our students, journalists, and researchers alike. Next slide. In relation to the objectives and the results of the study, the researchers concluded that, first, the researchers acquired sufficient data on COVID-19 vaccines using a web scraper. Also, the preliminary procedures of cleaning, pre-processing, and annotation before model training were proven to be effective. Next. SVM model was effectively integrated into the web browser plugin and can predict respective ratings for future classifications of unlabeled data. Next. Lastly, support vector machine algorithm perform better classification and effectiveness by achieving the highest score on all evaluation metrics compared to k-nearest neighbors algorithm. Next slide. With that all said, here are the recommendations for future directions. Add more datasets, particularly fake articles, to come up with a better structured datasets for training. Incorporate a semantic analysis to extract meaning from text rather than relying solely on statistical methodologies. Moreover, use semi-supervised learning algorithms like BERT and deep learning methods such as long short-term memory and multi-channel convolutional neural network. Next, explore incorporating the fact-checking model into a mobile app. To improve the fact-checking process, some action might be considered following the fact-checking results. For example, report to administration or creator. Lastly, with the emerging trends of fake news, not just in the healthcare sector, it can be used to handle similar problems such as fake news detection, general or topic-specific, spam detection, scam detection, and can be utilized for a different dataset. Again, this is confirmed your easy access tool in fighting COVID-19 vaccine misinformation.
Thank you, Ms. Castro, for sharing your research. The floor is now open for questions from our judges. So let me remind the judges that we only have 10 minutes for the Q&A portion. We will start the questions with Dr. Gloria, to be followed by Dr. Yap and Dr. Saniel. Judges?
Thank you very much, Sir Chonko. Congratulations and good morning, Ms. Castro. I have the challenge of asking you the very first question. First of all, I really do congratulate you and your team for such a critically important work that we know is very much needed through this pandemic. We believe that false news and the outbreak of false news and false information have made COVID and other public health measures much more dangerous because people are not believing the science because they can't sift through what's real and what's fake. So thank you, Ms. Castro, for doing such incredibly amazing and important work that not only has application for this pandemic, but also has applications for a lot of other public health topics. So really, I'm excited about the collaborations between public health and computer science, which certainly will be the future for all of us. And so I have really a couple of questions, and I'll ask one at a time, and depending on how you answer, I might follow up with the second one, Ms. Castro. In your slide, I think I saw a slide regarding your data validation, and that you employ one medical doctor to validate the data. Is it true that you're only looking at one and not considering multiple medical professionals to validate the data?
We consulted only one medical practitioner, considering that we gathered information from web which are already validated by professionals.
Thank you very much. I would recommend certainly if you have the capacity, especially in your continued work, to consider having multiple experts, considering that there are perhaps various perspectives on certain areas. And my second and last follow-up question here for you regarding your response, especially during the pandemic when we as a global community, scientific community, scrambled to learn everything we could about this new virus, and facts were actually changing regularly over time as we learned more, as we uncovered more through our research. Do you have a plan on making sure that your fact checking is updated regularly with the latest news and facts that we uncover over research?
We plan to incorporate a new feature wherein we can update information from our database and be able to collect more information, latest information about the pandemic and also the vaccines.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ms. Castro.
So let me just immediately jump in. I suppose I'm following Dr. Gloria. So good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, congratulations, Ms. Castro, to you and your team. Really very, very relevant work that you are doing with this research. My question actually is sort of related to what Dr. Gloria had asked. I was a little bit wondering, because here the determination of whether information is true or not tends to be quite, how do I say, it is not very objective. But having said that, is there any other way by which you will be able to ascertain that the basis for determining that the information is true or not will be more reliable? I know that referring to WHO and DOH and medical experts are always good basis, but do you think there can be other ways? Because as you know, this kind of technology is very important precisely because we don't know much about what is happening with COVID. But can you consider or think about other ways by which you can really, really be sure that the information that you are using as basis for truth is really such?
We considering adding more information or articles from legitimate sites and consulting considering lots of mga specialties po, not just consulting a general practitioner, but also considering consulting to epidemiologists and other specialists that specialize on certain topics about COVID-19 and the vaccines.
Okay. Thank you for that. So my follow-up question there is, how do you resolve if there are certain quote-unquote facts or realities that you get, let's say, from WHO and DOH, but they're not aligned? Which one are you going to follow as the basis by which you determine that this particular piece of information is in fact fake and not true? Let's say from your sources that are supposed to be the correct sources, they're not of the same opinion or they're not coming out with the same statements related to a particular issue. How do you resolve that?
We consider information from WHO and some healthcare websites as factual, wherein we incorporate machine learning to identify either it's written in a positive note or in a negative note. We included negation words and some words that are related to vaccines only. We also made sure that we only filter information that are related to COVID and is really a comparison between false and factual information.
Thank you very much. Passing it on now to Dr. Sanyal.
Dr. Sanyal.
Good morning. Congratulations, Medel, Ms. Castro and your team for the very innovative undertaking. I wish, we had this kinds of project when we were at the height of the COVID-19, and the national task force would probably benefit a lot from this kind of work, especially that we had an epidemic of fake news, and there were so many experts, quote unquote, during that time. So, well, I'd like to to underscore the importance of what Dr. Gloria and Dr. Yap said about using multiple sources of information, because you know COVID-19 is a problem not only of one, a particular science or a particular discipline. So it covers both epidemiology, infectious diseases, medicine, lab science, and so on. So you can't really rely on the opinion of just one person. Maybe he's very good, but at that time, or at this time, there's still so many things that are unknown, not very clear with COVID-19. So that's one. Well, since that I'm more on the epidemiology and statistics, so I was reading the report, and you used parameters like accuracy, precision, recall, and F1 score. But I was wondering, you used the same formula for was it precision and recall? I don't know if it's a typo in your paper, but you used the same formula. But unlike, there would probably be many people who would benefit if you just define what you meant by TP, FN, FP, and so on. This was not defined in that paper. But anyway, I wish you would be able to improve your this model further, and I am hoping to see it put to use. Baka magamit na natin yan. Thank you very much, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Doc.
Thank you very much to our dear judges and Ms. Castro. Okay, so let us now proceed with our second presenter. We have Ms. Hazel Faith N. Pelpinosas. Ms. Pelpinosas recently obtained her Bachelor of Science in Applied Mathematics. Today, she will present their research titled A Type of SEIR Model with a Large Set of Undetected Asymptomatic with Short and Long-Term COVID-19 Dynamics to Better Comprehend Vaccination, Immunity, and Treatment. Okay, Ms. Pelpinosas, your 15 minutes starts now.
A pleasant morning to everyone, to all the initiators, to the panel of judges, to my co-author and participants, my greetings. This hour, I will be presenting a research paper which titled A Type of SAR Model with a Large Set of Undetected Asymptomatic with Short and Long-Term COVID-19 Dynamics to Better Comprehend Vaccination, Immunity, and Treatment. Next slide, please. The World Health Organization identified a new genealogy of severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus pathogen known as COVID-19 disease, which is critically contagious. The first index case in the Philippines suspects on January 22, 2021, where the nation experienced a surge after surge infections that reaches about 3.6 million on June 13, 2022. Now, mathematical modeling brings salient contribution in terms of management and response for the pandemic. For instance, what Giuseppe et al. And Arcedi et al. Did in their researches. With the current situation where new variants emerge, some questions needs immediate answer. First, will the COVID-19 still works? Second, does COVID-19 will disappear soon? And third, does our healthcare system efficient enough? Well, this paper extends the work of Arcedi et al. While inspired by Gieta et al., accounting vaccinated compartment with immunity and vaccine effect on susceptibility, minding the nature of COVID-19 imperfect vaccine. Next slide, please. The aim of the study is to develop a short and long-term COVID-19 model incorporating vaccination, immunity, and treatment to estimate the optimal parameters, determine the population incidence with varying vaccine waning manifestation, determine the beds infected ratio of treatment to achieve a near zero infection, to determine the ratio of symptomatic to asymptomatic, reported to unreported recovered, accounting for natural and vaccine waning immunity with the presence of population turnover, and to study the waning immunity and vaccination strategies. Next slide, please. Here, the methods used in this research are this link. This link is from the Johns Hopkins University. We also use the COVID-19 tracker, the Philippine Statistics Authority. For the parameter estimation, it was done through approximate Bayesian computation in our language using Spider version 5.1.5 with collaboration of the codes by a mathematician, Professor Joseph Mamery of France. And to interpret the simulation, we use the RJupyter software. And then we resort to a workable framework, the mathematical model. The model breaks into 7 compartments: the susceptible, exposed, symptomatic infected, asymptomatic infected, under treatment, reported recovered, unreported recovered, and vaccinated individuals. And from the model, at first, COVID-19 disease is being transmitted among human population classified as susceptible class, whom are having a vulnerability to acquire infection. The exposed can have 3 conditions after tested according to DOH. It can be symptomatic infected, asymptomatic, and those directly passed through undertreated in hospital. A delay between a certain stimulus of exposed triggers to become symptomatic and asymptomatic was measured by latency rate delta E. Special factors to add the pools of symptomatic is due to the protection by undergoing vaccine is less effective, at which vaccines affect the susceptible is more consequential in nature. And the population of undertreated individuals is determined by the treatment of symptomatic individuals and exposed individuals. It is then decreased by the natural deaths and deaths due to the infection and recovery from undertreatment. Accordingly, there were 2 classes of recovered: the reported recovered and unreported recovered. Reported recovered was assimilated with the recovery of those undertreated, including those symptomatic. After recovered, there is so-called the loss of antibodies or the natural waning immunity rate, theta, and the presence of births of susceptible and the deaths. For vaccinated compartment, even though vaccine moderated type of doses, these individuals enjoyed temporary immunity to new infection at the rate sigma. And the decrease of vaccinated due to the effect of vaccine were not fully protected against the virus. We denote here the beta E, since vaccinated can be also symptomatic when there is contact of exposed, and then transmission of disease is convincible. Therefore, the dynamics are governed by a system of ordinary differential equation as shown in the screen. Next slide, please. To determine the disease is spreading either largely or less, or its endemicity, we initiate to solve the basic reproduction number by first selecting the disease class from ordinary differential equation. And we perform derivation of these classes by segregating the rate of secondary infections from the rate of non-secondary infections, which transforms into a 3x3 matrix of Jacobian matrix. And by Gaussian-Jordan elimination, we find the inverse of our 3x3 non-secondary infections, then multiplying the result of our secondary rate of infections of Jacobian matrix and the inverse of non-secondary matrix, and we got the next generation matrix. We solve the determinant of a 3x3 matrix from the next generation matrix and arrive to the characteristic equation that composed of the R0. And the basic reproduction number, or R0 of the system, is obtained by the dominant eigenvalues. So R0 is equal to the fraction of that result, which can be shown in the screen, where we encapsulate the equation into a variable for notational simplicity. Our solving here was checked through SAGMAT software. Next slide, please. Here are the parameters we used in our simulation. Next slide, please. In doing so, in Spider, we find the box plot illustrating posterior distribution, calculated fitted data from the Philippines, which we obtained the estimation of the parameter values of gamma A, nu E, nu S, and nu U. By that, the effective reproduction number is 1.03, meaning an outbreak or cycles will occur soon. And the best fit for our parameter simulation has a 0.9 distribution. Next slide, please. For the results, when there is no intervention, the infection peak appears at 5th month, that is about 9.7 exposed, 900,000 symptomatic, and a large set of asymptomatic individuals, it's about 7.4 million. In real time, if we count from March 30, 2020, the data where the peak occurs is around August 2020. The simulation here is somewhat accurate since there is a lag in reporting from DOH, while unreported recovered is 12 times larger than those reported recovered. Yet this is alarming to say in our results. Next slide, please. In the scenario with the presence of vaccination, immunity, and treatment, firstly, looking at the right side facing your laptop, performing a 1 to 6 times the vaccine rate of 38,995 doses per day, our simulation reveals that within a year, we observe a decrease in incidence, the symptomatic, from over 2 million into a 1.7 million incidents compared to the number of symptomatic from the previous scenario without intervention. Here, the vaccine efficacy was set into the average of 80%. Hence, the vaccine effect susceptible is 20%. And when the vaccination rate is 10 times faster with the progression rates of 1:100, which is out of 100 infected, 1 will be hospitalized. And the vaccine winning immunity is in 180 days, we can see the peak of infection detected in early stage, then gradually declines. For instance, the exhaust of susceptible can cause the increase of vaccinated, which means that vaccination is necessary when the country has not good treatment strategies or any form of medical system. And with the varying vaccine rate sigma capturing 1, 3, 6, 9 to 12 months, it reveals the decrease of infection of a difference of 6,717 individuals from 1 to 3rd month, 1,780 individuals from 3 to 6 months, 614 from 6 to 9 months, and 311 from 9 to 12 months. Then there is a significant effect of susceptibility that captures leaky vaccines, since they can be the cause of heightening the symptomatic compartment as an effect of a severe number of infected. Hence, not all populations must be vaccinated to prevent the COVID-19 epidemic. Next slide, please. With the efficient treatment with vaccination, we can see a controllable number infection, which reduced into 40,000 symptomatic and 18,000 asymptomatic cases as an early time of optimal peak compared from the previous simulation. This means that the parameter we fitted is efficient enough against the real surge of the disease. Also, this is a very good benchmark, which considered to be a near zero infection of 1:2 ratio of beds infected. Hence, there is a need to balance the treatment while waiting for vaccination so that infection can never be escalated in macro scale context. And the most important to note here is that when we look on with efficient treatment and vaccination, vaccination has a huge factor that reaches 26% proportion of the population that would be susceptible. And when there is no intervention in all terms being implemented, there were around 66% of the susceptible class. Next slide, please. The epidemic curve of symptomatic infected in a long-term scenario where no undertreatment, no natural winning immunity, and no vaccination, the number of incidents oscillates over several generations. There are sharp epidemic cycles in which epidemics reoccur throughout time, but the peaks become smaller and smaller until they eventually subside. Like after 80 years, the second surge will occur with more than 250,000 symptomatic infected at its peak. The third spike occurs 125 years after, that is 65 years after the second spike. And after 160 years, that is 35 years of the third spike, the subsequent sharp rise can be felt, dropping to 50,000 symptomatic infected. Next slide, please. Here is the epidemic curve of symptomatic infected in the scenario with presence of undertreatment with natural waning immunity and with vaccination. Due to the natural waning immunity, the surge in symptomatic infected would never go off in 10 years. Even as the peak becomes smaller and smaller, infected will continue to shrink throughout 5 generations, but the situation will never be disease-free. And the number of susceptible people grows owing to the new births. Next slide, please. Here are the tallies of cumulative incidence, prevalence, maximum symptomatic, time of peak, total and percent of reported recovered, the unreported recovered of long-term dynamics, and which was accordance to the waning immunity of 3, 6, 9 to 12 month simulation. Next slide, please. Without intervention, we observe the sudden surge of infection due to the rate of transmission. And to achieve a near zero infection with the presence of vaccination, a balanced combination ratio of 1:2. That is, in every 2 infections, 1 must be hospitalized. That is in need for efficient treatment strategies. And the shorter sigma, or the waning, for instance, 3 months, the higher the peak of incidence compared to the longer waning rate of immunity. And there is an existence of sharp epidemic cycles in which epidemic reoccur throughout time, but the peak becomes smaller and smaller until they eventually subside due to the natural waning immunity. Next slide, please. Out from the result, we can therefore conclude that a large set of undetected asymptomatic infecteds were seen as a driving force for transmission of COVID-19. Hence, observing minimum public health standards is a must. Poor healthcare system lead to the prevalence of infection, therefore a need to raise adequate revenues to increase the beds capacity ratio. Vaccination, though imperfect and thus causing possible reinfection, is still effective in damping the surge. Thus, employing boosters injection is helpful, while effective communication to promote vaccination is encouraged. Next slide, please. These are the recommendations of the future researchers on the stochastic process of generated model, recreate the dynamics of vaccination with respect to exposure before becoming symptomatically infected, and to add a separate compartment for reinfection and on a refined structural population, and to navigate the vaccine at each specific brand, not an average. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pelpinosas, for sharing your study. The floor is now open for questions from our judges. The Q&A will start with Dr. Yap, to be followed by Dr. Saniel, and lastly by Dr. Gloria. Judges?
Thank you very much. So good morning, Ms. Espinosa, and congratulations on your very interesting and very impressive work. I do have to admit that I am no mathematician, so I am not able to follow the technicalities, but having contributed somehow during the time of the early period of the pandemic as part of the group that facilitated the COVID-19 laboratory experts, I do have some appreciation of the parameters that you're using. I actually have a very, very basic question. Since you said in your introduction, and I hope I understood it, that there were a couple of questions that you wanted to be answered with your research, one of which was, will the COVID-19 still works? I'm not quite sure what the meaning of this question is, but I'd like to interpret it as to say that through your model, you want to be able to answer or predict at the very least, will COVID-19 still persist or still continue on? Is that correct? And if it is,
Yes.
can you again tell us in simpler layperson's words what the answer is based on your model? Go ahead.
So, generally, out of the model I have worked, the question is, will the COVID-19 still works? At the very first time, we can say that the COVID-19 is still working, since there are numbers of symptomatic. There are many cases, but when this calibration was done before and during the intervention, and we can say out from the model, the COVID-19 is still working today, but in somewhat in smaller surge, unlike on the first surge which is on the first year of the disease. And well, the question was answered because there are also long-term simulation that this COVID-19 will be dependent on how the government, on how our healthcare system is being implemented and being contributed towards the protocols in our country.
Okay, thank you for that. So what you're saying is based on your model, the COVID-19 will still persist and be present. So, okay,
Yes.
I understand that. In the interest of time, I just want to ask one question that really just makes me very curious. What do you mean in your recommendation when you say that the stochastic process of generated model? I'm sorry, I do not understand it, and I'd like to understand what you mean because it is a recommendation. So if you could just explain it a bit in simpler terms, I'd appreciate it very much. Thank you. Go ahead.
The model itself, it is a deterministic, not a stochastic. Meaning, when we say deterministic, the parameters are defined, and we can see that the prediction is somewhat deterministic, while the stochastic process has many curves, has many iterations to see that the model is quite relevant. That's why we perform a deterministic, not a stochastic process, since the stochastic process is difficult to perform a simulation, since we never know what may come when we say a parameters on some values. So that's the difference between the stochastic process and
Okay. Thank you very much. On to the next question, please, for the other judges. Thank you.
Dr. Seniel.
Good afternoon. Still morning, sorry. Morning, Hazel. Yeah, can I just call you Hazel? Still very young, but I read your paper twice or even thrice because I was actually very interested in what your assumptions were in making all those boxes. So well, for instance, I don't even know what SEIR stands for. Hindi yata na-define sa papel. Well, anyway, you can answer that, Hazel. Being an epidemiologist, I'm the disease process actually depends on three important actors. These are the virus, the population, which is affected by the virus, and the environment in which the interaction between the virus and the population occurs. Okay. Well, of course, numbers are numbers. Kahit anong ilagay mo siya, magpo-compute yan. Kahit ano siya. But, as I said, a lot of assumptions you made. You said you do simulations. But the further you are, in the future, simulations will just be simulations. And it's also actually difficult to predict, what the level of the virus or the cases that we will have, let's say, 2 weeks or a month from now. But more so, kung ganun kahabang 80 years. No? So, kasi nagbabago ang characteristic ng virus. That's why, it took some time for us to understand, how to respond, because we didn't really understand what the characteristics and properties of the virus are. Nagbabago pa yan hanggang ngayon. And you know that very well. So, so we have to be a bit, we temper ourselves with this, crunching numbers, because, the things that would predict or tell us whether the virus would
Dr. Seniel?
Miss Palpinosas, we lost Dr. Oh, there you are,
There,
Dr.
Dr.
Senor.
Seniel.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes po, loud and clear.
Yes, sorry, I get this message that my internet connection is unstable. Yun lang. I think the epidemiologist in me actually, is looking for the basis of the interaction between the three important actors in this epidemic: the virus, the population being affected, and the environment. So when we say the virus, ano yung transmissibility, ano yung infectiousness? When we say the population, ilang percent ang susceptibles? We know very well that you can get secondary infection, third, and so on. We don't know that. Okay, and then ano yung ease of transmission? So how will the level of vaccination affect susceptibility? How about the environment? No, meron tayong ventilation and so on. And siguro because of the public health training in me, hindi parang nagre-react ako dun sa yung 1:2 and 1:10 and 1:50. Sabi mo may ma-hospitalize na isa out of every Hazel, can you explain that some more? Kasi hindi, parang baka mali lang yung intindi ko.
So basically in our results, there is a 1:2 ratio of beds infected where a near zero. Maybe there are those changes in the paper itself and in the PowerPoint itself. And we can, for clarification, with the efficient treatment with vaccination, there is a need of 1:2 ratio of beds infected. That means that out of 2 infected, there is 1 must be hospitalized, and that is there is a need to balance. Therefore, we can see that there is a need to balance the treatment with vaccination
to bring down the level of COVID-19. Is the one must be hospitalized for every 2 infected.
Yes.
Yes. Oh.
But in the real setting in the Philippines, I think this ratio is a good benchmark, since we have a limited resources in terms of health system, unlike in the other country.
Yes, and to support what you said, when you use hospitalization, it's a bit late. Nagkasakit na yung tao. So why wait na magkasakit? Why prevent? Why not prevent para hindi magkasakit, para hindi ma-hospitalize? Yun yung public health. So ang wag nating tingnan, wag nating i-measure ang sasabihin natin para ma-reduce, bumaba yung number ng ating reproductive number or maging mawala yung epidemic, ay kailangan merong sa bawat 2 infected may isang hospitalized. Pero as public health person, wag na nating antayin hospital. So late na yon pagka na hospital. And we know very well that hindi lahat ng COVID-19, especially nung nagkakadamihan, ay na-hospitalized. Only the severe, okay, are hospitalized, and only those with comorbidities were hospitalized. So yung ating data ay hindi should not be taken hook, line, and sinker. Yung ating test ay hindi lahat binibigay, lalo nung umpisa. Konting-konti lang yung mga testing natin. So let's be careful with using numbers, because hindi static yung epidemic. Hindi static yung knowledge natin about the virus and about the transmission. So yun lang. So let's be more temper ourselves with these projections, kasi di natin pa alam masyado. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Seniel. And lastly po, Dr. Gloria.
Thank you, Sir Chonko. May time pa ba?
Yes po, sir. Yes po,
I'll
go
be
ahead.
I'll be very brief. Congratulations again, Ms. Palpinosa's brilliant work. I really do appreciate, similar to a comment that I said earlier to the first presenter, how we are all collaborating, partnering with sort of non-traditional public health healthcare partners like computer science and math, because it really helps us understand problems from many corners of our knowledge and intelligence, and really help us learn from the past to respond to the present as well as plan for the future. And we know that during the COVID, I guess from the beginning all the way to now, math modeling had been providing some really useful information in terms of understanding potential trends, although the trends are not always so predictable, but also to help us respond, and especially in the Philippines when there's a lack of resources, it helps us manage our resources to and direct them to places most in need. So again, congratulations on such brilliant work. I do agree with the comments from Dr. Yap and Dr. Saniel, so I'll not repeat them, but I especially do agree with Dr. Yap. This is a comment that I said to the professional presenters yesterday. So even the experienced veterans can learn a lot from translation of research. And so clearly your work is brilliant. It's a lot of math. I'm lucky because I studied math a little bit in college, so I was able to understand some, but not all. But try to figure out when you are presenting to diverse audiences, especially since we are judging you based on presentation, try to figure out ways, which is a lot harder to do than easier said than done, right? Try to figure out ways on translating all of your brilliant math information into deliverables that most people will be able to appreciate. And so if I send your math modeling to the computer science fact-checking doctor, hopefully he'll be able to assess that it is a fact versus fiction, right? And so I'm sorry, I'm spending too much time. My quick question for you, Ms. Palpinosas, I saw on your slide that you gathered and used data from Johns Hopkins as well as from the Philippine DOH. Do you think it was good practice to combine the global and local data, or should we look at Philippine trends specifically and not include the Johns Hopkins world data? Thank you.
John Hopkins University, the link itself compiles many countries, confirms deaths, and we only looking at the Philippines data that is from January 30, 2021 to July 19, 2022. And there are some, looking at some researchers, they also used this links that is very updated and a clean data na po. So that's why we are able to adapt this methods in terms of the data gathering.
Great response. Thank you so much, Ms. Palpinosas.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to our judges and Ms. Pelpinosas. On to our next presenter. We have Miss Princess Jewel V. Guzman. Miss Guzman is an undergraduate student. Miss Guzman is an undergraduate student of Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy. Aside from her interest in research, she is also into writing. She has participated in various school press conferences and has written articles in literary pieces for the college publication of their school. Today, she will be presenting their research titled Practices and Challenges of Antimicrobial Stewardship Among Pharmacists in Selected Community and Hospital Pharmacies in Bacolod City. Ms. Guzman, you may now begin your presentation. Ms. Guzman, you may now start.
Good.
Okay, Ms. Guzman, you may now begin with your presentation.
By 2050, 10 million people are projected to die each year due to antimicrobial resistance. Antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, is a biological phenomenon characterized by a microorganism's ability to develop resistance to antibiotics that were once effective against them. AMR is a problem because it is harder to treat, more costly, and more deadly. Fortunately, this could be stopped. One of the strategies we use is the regulation and rational use of antimicrobials. Antimicrobial stewardship, or AMS, is powered by many different healthcare providers, including pharmacists, who can be found in both community and hospital settings. Today, we practice good stewardship of the utilization of antimicrobials through AMS programs. But various challenges inhibit the full realization and actualization of the beauty and purpose of AMS. My name is Princess Jewel Guzman, and let me share with you the findings of our study called Practices and Challenges of Antimicrobial Stewardship Among Pharmacists in Selected Community and Hospital Pharmacies in Bacolod City. In our study, we aim to first determine the demographic profile of pharmacists in Bacolod City based on their sex, age, area of practice, length of service, and highest educational attainment. Then, based on this demographic profile, we also wanted to determine their AMS practices and challenges. Further objectives include determining if there is any significant difference in the AMS practices and challenges between community and hospital pharmacists. We also wanted to determine if there is any significant relationship in the demographic profile and AMS practices, as well as challenges. To achieve our objectives, we utilized the quantitative survey approach and descriptive design. The respondents of our study were community and hospital pharmacists who were selected through stratified random sampling. The sample size was calculated to be 197 using modified Cochrane's formula. As for our research instrument, we used a 26-item self-administered survey questionnaire that we adapted from literature. It contains 15 items for AMS challenges and 11 items for AMS challenges, 15 for AMS practices and 11 for AMS challenges. This survey questionnaire was subjected to content and face validity by a panel of experts, including a clinical pharmacist and community pharmacist, as well as a psychometrician. Meanwhile, its internal consistency was determined through a pilot study of 20 pharmacists. The Cronbach's alpha values for AMS practices and challenges were 0.782 and 0.749 respectively, both indicating adequate internal consistency. Afterwards, the research proper was initiated. Both printed and online copies of the questionnaire were distributed to the respondents. Upon retrieval, these responses were subjected to data analysis. We used frequency distribution for determining the demographic profile, as well as the AMS challenges based on demographic profile. Mean was used for determining the AMS practices based on demographic profile. Independent sample p-test was used for identifying any significant difference, and chi-square test of independence for any significant relationship. Upon data gathering, we were able to retrieve 136 responses, and these were analyzed. For our first objective, this graph shows the demographic profile of pharmacists in Bacolod City, based on their sex, age, area of practice, length of service, and highest educational attainment. For sex, majority of our respondents were female. This goes along with the findings of the International Pharmaceutical Federation, as well as that of the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, which found that the workforce of the pharmacy profession is dominated by women. As for age, majority of our respondents belong to the 21 to 35-year age group. This goes along with evidence from the FIP, which found that nearly half of practicing pharmacists are 40 years old or younger. In a similar sense, we also found that majority of the pharmacists had 1 to 3 years of work experience. This could be relevant because based on one study, more experienced pharmacists hold positive perceptions towards AMS. The high number of younger pharmacists and those with fewer years of experience may be due to the recent rise of pharmacy graduates and the fact that older pharmacists are retiring. Unsurprisingly, for the area of practice, community pharmacists dominate over hospital pharmacists. This finding goes along with other studies which found that majority of pharmacists work in the community setting. Furthermore, this finding could be due to the fact that drugstores consistently outnumber other drug establishments, including hospital pharmacies. Lastly, only 1 out of 136 respondents held a master's degree and none for doctorate degree. The rest of the respondents had a bachelor's degree for their highest educational attainment. For our second objective, the AMS practices of pharmacists, such as the dispensing of antimicrobials with complete clinical information, collaboration with prescribers, communicating with other healthcare professionals, and educating patients and staff, were some of the practices reported to be frequently done by pharmacists. Since the difference in how frequently they conduct AMS is small, we only focused on 3 that were most notable. First is the dispensing of antimicrobials without a prescription. This graph shows the interpretation for the mean intervals of pharmacists across demographic profiles. The mean intervals for dispensing antimicrobials without a prescription were interpreted as never practiced by the pharmacist. This is in contrast with the finding of Lee et al., which said that antimicrobials could be obtained without a prescription in the Philippines. 2 other notable AMS practices that we were able to take note of are the conduct of AMS audits and the report of compliance to AMS restriction policy. These 2 are notable because unlike the rest of the AMS practices, they are less frequently conducted by pharmacists across demographic profiles, except hospital pharmacists. Therefore, the results indicate that AMS is strongly practiced. However, there are some practices, as mentioned before, the conduct of AMS audits and the reporting of compliance, that must be done consistently to ensure the success of AMS. Meanwhile, this graph shows the percentage of respondents who said yes to having an AMS program in their respective institutions. This is not a challenge, but this is included here to show its contrast to the study of Lee et al. Our results show that more than 50% of pharmacists, regardless of their demographic profiles, report to having an AMS program in their respective institutions. Although it doesn't identify if the AMS program is new or old, this finding still suggests that AMS is welcomed and implemented widely. On the other hand, the challenges that we did identify across demographic profiles are the lack of access to patient records when assessing the suitability of antibiotic prescription and the lack of mandatory training to engage in AMS practices. These challenges were identified as major barriers in other AMS studies. The lack of access to patient records were identified as a challenge by community pharmacists, by pharmacists with 1 to 3 years of experience and those with more than 6 years of experience, and by all age groups. Meanwhile, the lack of mandatory training was identified by community pharmacists, by pharmacists with less than a year and 1 to 3 years of experience, and by pharmacists aged 21 to 35 years old. As for hospital pharmacists, no challenges were identified. As shown in the graphs, it can be concluded that regardless of the pharmacist's demographic profiles, the lack of mandatory training and access to patient records could hinder effective AMS implementation. Having noted the demographic profile, the AMS practices, and the AMS challenges, we now look at this table, which shows that there is a significant difference in the practices between community and hospital pharmacists. What this means is that the AMS practices of pharmacists could differ depending on their area of practice. This is further supported by the study of Garatini, which found that community and hospital pharmacists have different healthcare professions. For one, hospital pharmacists may conduct AMS audits more frequently than community pharmacists. Similarly, we also found that there is a significant difference in the challenges when practicing AMS between community and hospital pharmacists. As seen in previous graphs, the challenges to AMS practices are experienced more by community pharmacists than hospital pharmacists. Unlike hospital pharmacists, community pharmacists, according to the World Health Organization, have lesser defined roles in AMS, lack access to patient records, and perform in time-poor setting. In our study, the challenges that we identified for community pharmacists were the lack of access to patient records and lack of mandatory training. Furthermore, in line with the study of Akbar et al., we found that sex, age, and length of service are not significantly related to the AMS practices of pharmacists. In other words, only the area of practice determines how pharmacists practice AMS. In a similar sense, we also found that there is no significant relationship between challenges and demographic profile except for the area of practice. Our findings show that sex, age, and length of service do not define the challenges of a pharmacist in practicing AMS. The results shown in this study offer fresh insights that could be used as a reference for improving the implementation of AMS in the Philippines. For this reason, we humbly give the following recommendations. For policymakers, we recommend designing policies that ensure the continuous education and training of pharmacists regarding AMS. Alongside with awareness and education, training ensures or facilitates better adoption of AMS interventions. We also recommend considering policies that may allow pharmacists access to patient records because access to patient records give way to more informed clinical decisions, which could reduce medication errors and improve pharmaceutical care. And in line with this, we recommend improving healthcare information systems so that it could facilitate ease of access to patient records. Meanwhile, for future researchers who may wish to replicate our study, we recommend widening the scope so that it may include a wider research setting and a longer duration. We also recommend conducting interviews to determine factors that may undermine the AMS practices of pharmacists. And lastly, we recommend conducting a related study about AMS and consumers. With the prevalence of antimicrobial resistance and the dangers it poses to society, it becomes even more important to invest in strategies that could prevent the growth and emergence of AMR. Hence, with our study, we hope that we could help our pharmacists become better equipped at controlling and preventing AMR in the Philippines for the sake of present and future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Guzman, for sharing your study. The floor is now open for questions from our judges. For the first question, let me now call Dr. Saniel to be followed by Dr. Gloria and Dr. Yap. Dr. Saniel, the floor is yours po.
Congratulations to you, Miss Princess, yes, and to your team for a very interesting study. Well, actually, your study has contributed in a way, important information on what the pharmacist would need to help them or to make them, better stewards of, use of antimicrobials. But I have some misgivings or problem with your study or the way you analyze your study, because I think you veered away a bit from your objectives when you started, analyzing AMS practices by age, by sex, by LOS. Is that I don't think that's a part or major part. You want just to characterize them, right, in terms of age, sex, but you don't really want to see the association between age and AMS practices, between sex and AMS practices, because you should be guided by your literature review. Meron bang nagsabi sa literature na naiiba o naapektuhan ng sex or age or length of service or education yung AMS practices? So maski na yung ano mo din yung mga your conclusions, actually you found only the area of practice as significant, right? And well, I don't know if you realized it. you did not summarize your AMS practices. You analyzed per question. No, so you had 15 questions versus 15 AMS statements by sex, another 15. So in total, just for the AMS practices alone, you did 195 statistical tests. Hindi ko alam kung na-realize mo yun. No, 195. And by the virtue of yung number na yun, may makukuha kang significant. No, so I think you need to focus a bit para mas organize yung ano mo. Focus on the objective, which is to differentiate kung ano yung, kung merong bang pagkakaiba yung practices nila at yung challenges noong mga pharmacists with respect to area of practice. Actually, gusto ko yung recommendation to make it qualitative, yung challenges. Kasi makakaano kayo, can go in depth doon kaysa just magiging quantitative. So 195. So sobra-sobra 'yon sa mga testing natin kasi tinest mo yung mga hindi mo kailangan. So yun lang, and congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you po.
Thank you, Dr. Saniel. Dr. Gloria.
Thank you, Ms. Guzman, and congratulations as well. Very much agree with Dr. Saniel's comments and concerns as well as recommendations. It did make me wonder, why are we comparing all of these groups? Was this based on what have been driven by literature and what others have found? And so it's important to, whenever you do any kind of tests or comparisons and analyses, that there's a basis for it so that you are not, in a way, potentially wasting all of your time and effort. But at the end of the day, even finding no significance at least informs us that, okay, so maybe in the future we don't need to look at this again. Let's see here. I got a lot of things to say here. I guess my question for you, Ms. Guzman, is my question actually aligns with your recommendations. When you identified the lacks and the gaps in AMS implementation and practices, you recommended creating policies to provide these and fill these lacks and gaps, right? And so I guess my question for you is, can you provide more concrete recommendations for our policymakers or decision makers? How do you see us actually making it a reality and filling the gaps and the lacks in implementation and training and practices so that so we can fill this sooner than later, right? If we wait for policymakers to make these things happen, it might be a little longer than we'd like. And so what can you see short-term, long-term we can do now to begin increasing and improving implementation and practices?
For policymakers, the way we see it is that they can design policies that includes a detailed plan or requires institutions to conduct seminars or educational activities that include CPD units for pharmacists so that they may be more encouraged to participate in this kind of activities so that their awareness, their education and training towards AMS are improved or ensured.
Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and turn the mic over to Dr. Yap.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to also include my congratulations to you, Princess, and your team for very interesting and very relevant work. However, I will have to share the same sentiments or the same opinions raised by both Dr. Saniel and Dr. Gloria, where I did find that that you wasted some energies trying to analyze or try to find correlations with demographics and other parameters. But however, I kept on going back to your paper because I couldn't find the literature to support this. But having said that, I want to push a little further what Dr. Gloria already started about more granular recommendations for policymakers, because I do believe that antimicrobial stewardship is a very, very important dimension. Having said that, I was just wondering whether you do have references, I am sure, about what are the key pillars or key dimensions of an AMS program, because I find it a little difficult really to recommend more access to patient records in a community pharmacy setting. I think that's not realistic at all. And I was not really surprised that the AMS knowledge and maybe challenges were a little lesser in a hospital setting. For after all, antimicrobial resistance, that reality is more felt and more known in a hospital setting. So let me just maybe ask your thoughts on this, Princess, about what you think, no, as you are recommending more access to patient records and training. How do you see that working in a community pharmacy setup? Go
For
ahead.
me, Miss, giving access to community pharmacists to patient records could help our community pharmacists look at the prescriptions or the medicines that they have taken previously or are taking currently, so that they can identify interactions or the durations of these medications, so that they could prevent medication errors and have more informed clinical decisions for the sake of the patient as well, so that they will have improved quality of life, and as well as to increase the effectivity of medicines.
Understood. However, let's be realistic here. I'm a physician and I see patients and I write a prescription. Are you expecting me to put their history of previous medications, etc., like I were filling up a medical record, knowing that my patient is not confined and will purchase his or her medicine in one of the big chains, let's say, big retail chains that are defined in your study as community pharmacies? Is that a realistic thing, do you think? Or did you find best practices in your literature review to show that that in fact happens and works in other settings with very robust antimicrobial stewardship programs?
Actually, Miss, in other countries, they don't have give access as well to patient records in community settings, but but some studies look into it so that to improve as well the medication error. And this access to patient records, we think, would be more suitable if it is through electricals or to
Electronic records, you mean?
RAS, yeah, so that only healthcare professionals could have access to it, or authorized healthcare professionals could have access to it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, judges and Ms. Guzman. For our next presenter, we have Ms. Geraldine Joy G. Corpus. Ms. Corpus recently earned her degree in Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy. She has contributed 3 years of service to their school organization, as an active member of the Federation of Junior Philippine Pharmacists Association. Additionally, she has actively participated in student exchange programs in various countries in 2021. Today, she will share with us her paper titled Brine Shrimp Toxicity and Anti-Inflammatory Activities of Psychotria luzoniensis lift methanol crude extract and its N-hexane and aqueous enriched fractions. Ms. Corpus, your 15 minutes starts now.
Good day, everyone. It is an honor to have the opportunity to present to you our research study, and despite the overwhelming consequences of the pandemic, This global crisis has also provided an exceptional opportunity for learning and research. I am Geraldine Corpus, and I'm going to present to you our research study entitled Brine Shrimp Toxicity and Anti-Inflammatory Activities of Psychotria luzonensis leaf methanol crude extract and its N-hexane and aqueous enriched fractions. Next slide, please. Inflammation occurs as a response to harmful stimuli such as pathogens, damaged cells, toxic compounds, or irradiation, and acts by removing injurious stimuli and initiating the healing process. Inflammation is therefore a defense mechanism that is vital to health. However, when this body's inflammatory response is prolonged and not regulated, it can eventually start damaging healthy tissues, cells, and organs. Over time, this can lead to DNA damage, tissue death, and internal scarring, which are all linked to the development of many diseases, including diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular diseases, cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, asthma, and chronic obstructive lung disease. In this regard, certain phytochemical substances obtained from various plants have been demonstrated to be useful in the management of inflammation. Psychotria luzonensis is a particularly interesting plant source of new compounds, with potential in the therapy of inflammatory-related diseases, since this plant is endemic to the Philippines with limited studies on its chemical and biological activities. Next slide, please. Thus, this study aims to discover new sources of lead compounds with potential in the management of inflammatory-related diseases that are locally available in the Philippines. To evaluate the cytotoxicity and anti-inflammatory activities of Psychotria luzonensis leaf methanol crude extract and its N-hexane and aqueous enriched fractions by their LC50 using the brine shrimp toxicity assay, in vitro anti-inflammatory activities through protein denaturation technique, in vivo anti-inflammatory activities using hen's egg cordialantoic membrane test, and phytochemical presence. Next slide, please. For our methodology, the powdered leaves of Psychotria luzonensis were obtained from our advisor, which was previously collected in January 2021. A gratuitous permit was obtained from DNR in our region prior to the collection of the plant material and identified by a taxonomist and a curator. The powdered leaves were extracted by maceration using a methanol, then solvent partitioning using water and N-hexane. To evaluate the cytotoxicity of the P. luzonensis leaf extracts, brine shrimp lethality assay was conducted according to the method of Quasi et al., and the concentration of different extracts varied and were obtained through serial dilution technique using a simulated seawater. The extracts were added to the test tube with live brine shrimp nauplius and were inspected for 24 hours. The data gathered were used in the computation of the LC50 values. Anti-inflammatory activities of the plant sample were evaluated through protein denaturation method and headcount assay. The protein denaturation method performed as described by Kariwasan et al. And modified to fill the appropriate volume in a 96-well plate. A mixture of egg albumin, phosphate buffer solution, and varying concentration of P. luzonensis were used as a test sample. Diclofenac was used as a reference drug and DMSO as the control. The mixture were measured at 616 nanometer using a multi-mode microplate reader. The percentage inhibition of denaturation, which is an index of anti-inflammatory activity, was calculated. The headcount assay was conducted based on the method of Casgrey et al., in which there are 5 phases. First is the preparation of egg. Second is the preparation of the sample and positive control. Third, the procedure of assay. Fourth, the scoring of the phases of the eggs. And lastly, the calculation of the score for irritation. The extracts were analyzed for the presence of alkaloids, phenols, tannins, flavonoids, terpenoids, and saponins. Next slide, please. So the results revealed a variation in mortality rates in the brine shrimp larvae in the different concentration of the test extracts. The maximum mortalities for all the test extracts were recorded at a concentration of 1,000 microgram per ml, whereas zero mortality was recorded at concentration 0.1 microgram per ml and 1 microgram per ml for the all the extracts. There were no deaths recorded after 24 hours in the control group, and it was after 18 hours when shrimp started to die at a concentration of 101,000 microgram per ml. The response to the death at the concentration of 101,000 were the fastest mortality rate. The result indicates a concentration-dependent cytotoxicity of the Pilizonensis methanol crude extract and its N-hexane and aqueous fractions. This finding is consistent with prior researches indicating that traditional medicinal plant extracts generally exhibit a concentration-dependent cytotoxicity to brine shrimp larvae. Next slide, please. So the LC50 value is calculated by determining the concentration of the test compounds that can kill 50% of the population of the shrimp larvae. The LC50 values of the Pilizonensis methanol crude extract and its N-hexane and aqueous fractions were 1,863.71, 1,266.65 microgram per ml, and 1,253.96 microgram per ml respectively. So according to Mayer Toxicity Index and Clarkson Toxicity Criterion, extracts with LC50 values above 1,000 microgram per ml is considered to be non-toxic. Therefore, all the Pilizonensis extracts are classified to be non-toxic. Next slide, please. For our results in anti-inflammatory activity of the Pilizonensis using the protein denaturation method, protein denaturation has been linked to inflammatory responses and leads to a variety of inflammatory diseases, as protein lose their biological function when denatured. Moreover, tissue injury can also be attributed to the denaturation of the protein constituent of cells or of intercellular substances. Therefore, in the assay, the degree of inhibition of protein denaturation is directly proportional to its anti-inflammatory potential. The higher the degree of inhibition, the greater would be its anti-inflammatory activity. The result of this study showed that the Pilizonensis methanol crude extract and hexane and aqueous fraction exhibited a marked and concentration-dependent activity in which the highest inhibition rate was observed at a concentration of 100 microgram per ml. However, statistically, the N-hexane fraction consistently exhibited the highest inhibition rate at all concentration, followed by aqueous fraction and the equipotent methanol crude extract and diclofenac. This means that all Pilizonensis extract, to a certain extent, had the ability to inhibit protein denaturation, which implicated their anti-inflammatory activity. Next slide, please. So this is our result in anti-inflammatory activity using HETCAM assay. So furthermore, the Pilizonensis methanol crude extract and its N-hexane and aqueous fraction demonstrated their ability to delay the signs of inflammation such as lysis, hemorrhage, and coagulations. Delay of these vascular damages is indicative of anti-inflammatory activity. Next slide, please. Among the plant extract, inhibition of the inflammation is strongest by the aqueous fraction followed by N-hexane and lowest by the methanol crude extract. Although statistically at 700 microgram per ml, Pilizonensis extracts were not comparable with the reference drug diclofenac in vivo HETCAM anti-inflammatory activity. It is suggested that an increase in concentration of plant extracts will also increase their ability to inhibit inflammation. Next slide, please. Alkaloids and flavonoids were detected in all Pilizonensis extract. Flavonoids and alkaloids have been shown in numerous studies to prevent the onset and progression of inflammatory diseases. Although terpenoids were not detected in N-hexane, which could also reduce inflammation by their ability to inhibit and regulate the level of cytokines, inhibit the prostaglandin synthesis, and inhibit the albumin denaturation, but N-hexane extract is still exhibited as the strongest anti-inflammatory activity in vitro assay. This could be explained by the presence or amount of other constituents in extracts that could act synergistically and antagonistically. Next slide, please. The results of the in vitro and in vivo assay varied, which may be due to the difference in mechanism of action. N-hexane fraction action might involve inhibition of protein denaturation induced by heat, while aqueous fraction involved in the inhibition of protein denaturation chemically induced by SDS. Next slide, please. It was concluded from this study that Psychotrilizonensis methanol fruit extract and its N-hexane and aqueous fraction has the potential to be the source of new anti-inflammatory compounds that are capable of interfering with the inflammatory processes, which is non-toxic and locally available in the Philippines. Next slide. For our recommendation, first a further study on the Piliusinensis to maximize the potential of the plant as a source of medical drugs. Second, a further study on the Piliusinensis leaf extract must be done using a multiple doses in headcom assay to explain the plant's anti-inflammatory properties and explore its potential as a source of anti-inflammatory agent. Third, a quantitative analysis of phytochemical presence in Piliusinensis leaf extract must be conducted. Fourth, a more significant number of trials must be performed to establish anti-inflammatory activity between N-hexane and aqueous of Piliusinensis extract in headcom assay. And lastly, the study findings on the extract's toxicity profile are also limited. Acute oral toxicity up and down procedure is required to identify a more specific LD50. Thank you for listening. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Corpus, for sharing with us your study. We now open the floor for questions from our judges. So let us start our Q&A with Dr. Gloria, followed by Dr. Yap and Dr. Saniel. Dr. Gloria.
Thank you. Good morning and congratulations, Ms. Corpus and your team for very interesting and important work. And I love how your work also spotlights the many uses of our local natural resources that we can certainly capitalize on in many ways. Similar to a comment that's been said to an earlier presenter, clearly your work is brilliant. But in terms of translation, I would recommend looking into ways of translating your research results so that it is consumable and comprehensible to diverse audiences, right? And so para bang loading pa ako ng konti in terms of some of your information, but I was able to catch up, thankfully. And so on that note, I actually have two questions. And so let me just say both of them now. The first one is regarding my earlier comment, Ms. Corpus. If you were to explain this to a community member or to my mother, who's a banker, how would you summarize the results and significance of your research, as well as what are some future implications and applications of the results of your research that would go beyond the scope of your research objectives? Sorry, Ms. Corpus, would you like me to repeat it one by one?
Yes,
a long
please.
question. So my first question is a request, really, Ms. Corpus. Could you summarize your entire research and findings in a few sentences that would make sense to a community member?
Okay, for our research, the results of our study has a potential to be a source of new anti-inflammatory compounds that are capable in the interfering with the inflammatory processes, which is also a non-toxic and is locally available in the Philippines.
Thank you very much. It's actually concise and well said. And my second question, real quick, because I don't want to take too much time, is can you see some more granular, more concrete plans for how this would be applied in the future, short-term, long-term, beyond the scope of your research?
Since our study is only a preliminary screening for anti-inflammatory activities, a further investigation of anti-inflammatory activities of the plant, which is endemic in our country would be a good start to become a new compound, would be a new compound with a possible therapeutic potential. And in that case, we could apply for a patenting for the country's socioeconomic growth, sir.
Thank you very much. Great response and best wishes on your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gloria. Dr. Yap.
Okay, good morning, Geraldine and your team. Congratulations. I normally don't appreciate very much these kinds of trials or studies, but I actually enjoyed it, to be honest. And it was difficult at first with reading it, but having listened to you, it seemed clearer, and thank you for that. Now, let me just go on to some really practical question. No? So I understand that it has been like in the spirit of other herbal medicines that this plant, which is I think traditionally known in the country as tagpong gubat, has already been known to be used by lay people, by common, the common tao, so to speak, to be able to address some of their ailments, let's say ulcerations. Now, what would be, I perhaps this is not yet within the scope of the study that you did, but if we were to push this study forward, do you think there would still be some additional conditions or parameters related to this plant or this herbal medicine that needs to be present for it to be effectively used for its anti-inflammatory function? Let me just premise this question very quickly to say that I am very aware that before, let's say, a herbal plant like Lagundi finally got into approval and commercialization, it had to be of a specific variety that was grown in special circumstances. I happen to know that not all kinds of Lagundi plants can be processed into what is now being sold commercially. So do you think this will also be something similar for this particular tagpong gubat that you are studying? Is this something that will also be likely a scenario in the future?
Yes, ma'am.
So you're saying that maybe only the plants that are coming, let's say, from your region will be viable, but maybe similar plants that are grown in other places of the country are possibly not going to be as viable or as effective? Is that what you're saying?
A further study should be in a further study should be performed, ma'am, also, because our study is limited, ma'am, and it only relies to in vitro assays, ma'am.
Okay. And I guess my last question has to do with, I know that you've shown already how the potential or maybe the non-toxicity of this particular plant, but would you say therefore that perhaps that is the reason why those who've been using these plants as concoctions and applying it on their wounds did not have any ill effects because it is not as toxic or as problematic, even if it hasn't been subjected yet to studies like yours? Is that a correct thing to say?
Based on our data that we obtained, ma'am, it is actually not sufficient that that is safety, ma'am, to be ingested by we humans, ma'am.
Yeah.
However, due to the result of its non-toxicity, ma'am, due to its non-toxic property, ma'am, I think that it is really effective to become it is really effective to be that traditional medicine before, ma'am.
Okay, I know I'm pushing my time, but just quickly, if we meet people who say, gumagamit kami niyan tagpong gubat, nakakatulong talaga yan sa mga sugat, what do I say? Do I say, ay oo, mukhang totoo yan? Or do I say, ay, ingat po kayo kasi baka makalason yan? Just a quick answer. I know it's not very fair for me to ask it. I'm curious.
I would tell them, ma'am, that it's okay, ma'am, since it is non-toxic, ma'am. This is based on our results, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Saniel, over to you.
Thank you po, Dr. Yeah. Yeah, Geraldine, thank you very much for the very interesting study and the presentation. You know, I like reading these kinds of paper, and I think you know, in response to Dr. Gloria, you know, comment about making it more you know, accessible or understandable to lay person. I think you can improve your paper by including, you know, basic definitions. Like for instance, what were the parameters? Ano yung definition ng mga parameters at ano yung indicators that you use to how do you say, to show or demonstrate anti-inflammatory activity? I know it's there, but when I was reading it and when I was listening to you, merong pang mga kulang, hindi mo lahat inilagay doon sa paper mo eh. You know, like yung protein denaturation. Anong ibig sabihin ng denaturation? So in other words, what do you expect doon sa mga anong results ng test mo, makikita, to be able to say that there is anti-inflammatory activity. So parang ano yung, meron ka bang titinang result, may cut-off ka ba, ano yung hahanapin mo? So essentially what I was looking for is definition of terms. No? And I also would like to commend you on your attempt to show your conceptual framework and, you know, show there the relationships of the variables. But just let me just ask you, this is an experimental laboratory study. What is your independent variable here? Because you have 3 boxes in your conceptual framework. So the first box is what? In so yeah, because the conceptual frame, are you going to show your conceptual framework or what? Or are you going to answer my question?
For the independent variable, we
Yes,
have the
yes.
reason.
Ano siya, Geraldine? Because I want you to develop, you know, your conceptual framework some more, so that you know, the readers would understand exactly what you want to show in your study. So ano yung so first box mo lang yung mga independent variables mo.
For our first box, mom, we have the Pilizinensis leaf extracts, mom. For
Yeah.
our second box, we
No.
have
No, kasi ang tatlo yung ano, tinitingnan mo, yung crude extract, yung aqueous solution, at saka yung NXA fraction. So, and then for each of this, meron kang result noong anti-inflammatory activity. So essentially, you have 3 independent variables in your study. Iba-ibang parts lang siya at iba-ibang ano tawag na ninyo. So na tinetest nyo coming from the same plant. All right, leaf in a sense. And then ano yung a dependent variable? You want to say something? Sorry, baka i-stress kita.
for our independent variable, we have the methanol crude extract, the N-hexane, and the aqueous fraction, mom.
Yes, in a sense, right?
Yes,
Kasi
ma'am.
nahanapan mo lahat yun ng anti-inflammatory property yung bawat isang
Yes,
preparation na yun, hindi ba? So essentially, you have 3. What about your outcome variables or your dependent variable?
We should have a defined psychotrial resonances anti-inflammatory activity, mom.
Yes, wag masyadong broad kasi yung anti-inflammatory activity. So you have to define what your indicators are to be able to say that there are or is anti-inflammatory activity. So ganon. So kailangan yun kasi so that people would understand better yung inyong paper. And thank you and congratulations again.
Thank you, Ma'am.
Thank you very much, Ms. Corpus, and to our judges for all your questions and comments. Okay, now let's proceed with our next presenter. We have Mr. Kent Lance P. Garapan. Mr. Garapan recently earned his degree in Bachelor of Science in Nursing. Today, he will share with us his study titled Beneath the Serenity, the Lived Experiences of Nurses Assigned in the Care of Sexually Assaulted Patients. Mr. Garapan, you may now start with your presentation.
Good morning, esteemed panelists, and a good day to everyone. I am Kent Lance P. Garapan, here to present our research study, Beneath the Serenity, the Lived Experiences of Nurses Assigned in the Care of Sexually Assaulted Patients. Next slide, please. There are at least 20 cases of rape reported daily to the police, and the commission of sexual abuse remains high, with at least one woman or child being raped every 72 minutes in the country. The increasing rape cases not only places a burden to law enforcers, but also to nurses who are basically tasked in first line of care in dealing with sexually assaulted victims that require medical attention. With sexual assault or violence, there is more than just the physical aspect of a person that needs to be treated. Nurses who provide care for these patients do not only treat the wounds and restore the body. The trauma and the pain that was inflicted goes deeper than the flesh. Next slide, please. With rape cases, ideally, a specially trained nurse is required to provide rape victims with healthcare services, since they have undergone said training to provide culturally sensitive, developmentally appropriate, trauma-informed, and patient-specific evaluations and treatments. However, in the Philippines, there are no standardized trainings that prepare the nurses that have been assigned to provide care to sexually assaulted patients. This means that nurses here in the Philippines may not be properly equipped to handle these certain patients. A study made by Shana Mer shows that sexual assault nurse examiners have shown symptoms of vicarious trauma and burnout as a result of the continuous exposure to traumatic narratives. Next slide, please. With that being said, the study aimed to explore how the informants give meaning to their lived experiences as nurses that cater to sexually assaulted victims. Next slide, please. The study will be utilizing a qualitative design, specifically interpretative phenomenology. In our research design, we have utilized an interpretative phenomenology while applying Gadamer's hermeneutic circle and Manon's philosophy of four lived worlds. Our informants consist of Filipino registered nurses in the Philippines who are assigned to take care of sexually assaulted patients in any authorized facilities. To be specific, with the inclusion criteria, this means that any registered Filipino nurse in the Philippines who experience being assigned in the care of sexually assaulted patients in authorized facilities with at least 6 months of experience. Next slide, please. Gadamer's hermeneutic circle will allow the researchers of the study to be able to interpret the meanings of the informant's perceptions, while the informant is giving meaning to his experiences. Because of its circular nature, it allows the participants to give their own interpretation of the experience. At the same time, the researcher also interprets that experience. This also has an emphasis on trying to understand the experience as a whole and not just piece by piece. Next slide, please. In Manon's philosophy of four lived worlds, for us to better understand the world of lived experiences, Van Manen offers a reflection of the four life worlds of lived body, lived time, lived space, and lived relation. This design is beneficial for the study as it helps the researchers to better navigate the whole lived experiences of the informants. Next slide, please. Four major themes emerged during thematic analysis from the 5 informants of our study. Theme 1, the coming of the storm. Nurses assigned to care for sexually assaulted patients often have different experiences. The coming of the storm unveils the raw experiences of the nurses as they dive into the uncertainties of this phenomenon and how they equip themselves to be safe from the impending storm. Next slide, please. Theme 1 has 2 sub-themes. Theme 1, sub-theme 1, a cloud of uncertainty. A cloud of uncertainty refers to a state of ambiguity. This relates to the unfamiliar events that a nurse handling sexually assaulted patients may encounter when they first step into the area or facility, as emphasized by Pablo's verbalization of his struggles due to his unfamiliarity with these kinds of cases. Theme 1, Sub-Theme 2, Awaiting What Lies Ahead. Just like preparing for a coming storm, one should secure and prepare all the resources needed for them to survive the possible damage a storm could bring. This theme tackles on the preparation done by the nurse to equip themselves for the coming storm. This included attending training and counseling for sexual violence interventions according to Undoy, and how these kinds of trainings have helped them establish good rapport and provide services that are needed by the patient as stated by Oring. Next slide, please. Theme 2, Bracing for Impact. Nurses meet different people from all walks of life throughout their service, meaning that the experience, the intervention, the plan of care, and the interaction would never be completely the same. It is the action of gearing up and anticipating for the event that is yet to occur, and so that the self is protected from the blow and damages are mitigated. It has 3 sub-themes. Next slide, please. Theme 2, Sub-Theme 1, Closing In. The storm closes in, indicating the calamity that is still yet to arrive. In nursing, the nurse must first check themselves of any feelings, thoughts, or biases that they may have during the encounter. The informants find that this process allows them to identify any possible hindrances that can provide to be a problem to them, providing their patients with the highest quality of care. These would include any biases or prejudices about some of their patients. For example, Oring, who has expressed negative thoughts about her patients who are pokpoks or GROs, and Yolanda, who is correcting herself about rape victims who wear short skirts. Next slide, please. Theme 2, Sub-Theme 2, Landfall. The first drop of rain has landed. The storm has arrived. The nurses who have now been oriented and prepared are deployed onto the field. The interaction begins, and the nurse still does not know what to expect, causing feelings of uncertainty and worry. Given that the interaction is still starting, challenges like, these challenges are already arising simultaneously, which further indicates the official beginning of the nurse's hardships. Yolanda verbalizes how she has to pay attention to the smallest detail and look out for nonverbal cues and to be more sensitive to the patient and their situation. Rolly expresses how they greet the patient every morning and alter the environment to be more cheerful, and how they keep in mind the patient's personal care, which is not handled by a male staff nurse. Next slide, please. Theme 2, Sub-Theme 3, Surviving What Has Now Come. The nurse is now caught in the storm, struggling to survive to get through the storm. However, this is the moment where the preparations come into fruition. They have the skills that can help them maneuver and handle their patients. This talks about their responsibilities and the roles of the nurse in the sexual assault facility. A few examples would be the assessment of recently sexually assaulted patients, medical legal case assistance, providing medications like prophylaxis and even contraceptives, and a referral to a multidisciplinary team, to name a few, as verbalized by Ondoy and Uring. Next slide, please. Theme 3, Amidst Heavy Rains. During the informant stay in the facility, nurses were able to face unique yet quite similar experiences. Similarly, when facing heavy rains, its downpour has brought diverse effects to the people affected, embodying both negative elements and positive elements, which are sometimes overlooked. Next slide, please. Theme 3 has 2 sub-themes. Theme 3, Sub-Theme 1, Swallowed by the Tides. This refers to the moments where nurses are consumed by the surrounding negativity in their workplace or by simply conversing with their patients, which was mirrored as the tides. Here, the tides connote these nurses' adverse or negative life experiences, as similar in real-life situations when people connote the tides as a danger or threat to their safety. Pablo says that it has really affected him because he has absorbed these negative narratives, and it has been a struggle for them. Rolly has worries about what she has done or said, and if that had negative effects on the patient. Oring also has expressed how she had nightmares of being sexually assaulted, but hasn't had any experience of being sexually assaulted herself. Theme 3, Sub-Theme 2, Emerging from the Water. This connotes the informant's positive elements that they experience as they render their care to the sexually assaulted patients. Here, emerging from the water also signifies how one rises despite the surging levels of water, similar to a seed that emerges from high grounds when it has received ample water. To a farmer, witnessing their seed's growth brings them a series of positive emotions. The same manner that occurs when nurses feel fulfilled when they see their patients grow and empowered. Yolanda has expressed joy for her patients that have been able to leave their negative situations and have been empowered with the help that she has provided. all our informants have felt a sense of fulfillment and happiness that they were able to establish trust and see that their patients have been able to improve thanks to their care. Next slide, please. Theme 4, the rising of the sun. Amidst the uncertainty and negativity, there is a light that shines upon the path. Be that as it may, an individual must rise after a storm. This theme unwraps how the informants cope after tending care to individuals who are sexually assaulted and how the informant's experiences affected them after the passing of the storm. Next slide, please. Theme 4 has 2 sub-themes. Theme 4, sub-theme 1, shelter from the storm. Shelter from the storm recounts the different measures or ways of coping the informants have taken to deal with the negative implications that experience brought. Oring made mention of debriefing sessions at the end of the day to help unload and not bring home the burnout. Yolanda made mention of outing trips to help relieve stress. Informant Rolly has also had her own way of coping through retail therapy, and Pablo has made mention of overeating to cope with stress. Although negative, it is still a way of coping. Theme 4, sub-theme 2, the parting of the clouds, refers to the new beginnings, hopes, and how the experience affected the nurses physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and even spiritually. Hence connotes the fresh start after the storm passes. Ondoya shared his realizations thanks to his experiences as a sexual assault nurse examiner. Oring also stated how she has been transformed into a person who fights for sexual assault victims and an advocate. All the informants have expressed how they have become more sensitive and aware of people's different experiences and feelings, and how to have an open mind to be more understanding and empathetic towards those situations. Next slide, please. For our conclusion, we have concluded that nurses assigned in the care of sexually assaulted patients are specifically tasked to stress on the importance of maintaining professionalism and conveying an attitude that is free of any judgment and criticism. However, beneath the calm surface that these nurses are trying to portray, the study was able to unwrap the existence of a diverse positive and negative influences brought by the experience that these nurses are trying to suppress in order to continuously render their care effectively. Next slide, please. Despite the negative implications of our experience that has brought profound effects on how these nurses go about their everyday life, they still continue to prioritize the needs of their patients while setting aside their own, and found individualized coping measures. Next slide, please. We recommend to nurses assigned in the care of sexual assault facilities may use the experience of the informants as an inspiration and learning in order to become more aware of the importance of undergoing training prior to their exposure to the facility. To nurses in general, they can use the results in the study as an inspiration and an eye-opening experience where they will be able to recognize the importance and never underestimate the training, orientation, and seminars provided for them. To the community, so that they may be made more aware of the misconceptions they have regarding sexual assault nurses and see the important and significant role these nurses have as they work and perform their jobs. To the College of Nursing, to use the result to strengthen the concepts on therapeutic communication, therapeutic relationships, and psychiatric nursing to help improving quality care. To government agencies, to improve the Philippines' health response to sexual assault cases by evaluating the effectiveness of the facilities they provide while taking consideration and ensuring that the environment is well conducive for both the patient and the nurse, as well as establishing more training facilities and catering specialized training to these nurses. To private organizations, to recognize the importance of establishing a healthy work environment that is conducive for both its employees and its profound effects in ensuring better patient outcomes. To psychiatric facilities, to recognize the importance in catering trainings that will allow nurses to be able to be well equipped with appropriate knowledge and skills that deal with sexually assaulted patients. To future researchers, to also investigate the lived experiences of the other healthcare workers in sexual assault facilities, such as the social workers, psychologists, and police women. They may also look into the cultural aspects, religion, age, or other factors that make it difficult to raise awareness or develop programs that train nurses in the field of sexual violence. And with that, esteemed panelists, I am now ready for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garapan, for sharing with us the results of your research. Let us start with our Q&A with Dr. Yap, followed by Dr. Saniel and Dr. Gloria. Dr. Yap.
Thank you. So good morning, Mr. Garapan, Kent. Congratulations to you and your team. Very interesting work, and also kudos for taking on the time to listen to the narratives, no, of your fellow nurses who are taking care of sexually assaulted. Can I find out what is the context or environment by which you listen to the stories or documented the experiences? Is this a hospital setting? And let me just premise my question, because I don't really know how often or how huge or what is the incidence that sexually assaulted persons are admitted to the hospital, or is this in the setting of a community facility?
Well, for our interviews, since there was a limitation to the COVID pandemic, we did conduct our interviews through Facebook Messenger and through Zoom. However, we were able to see our informants, and we were able to discern and able to really collect the experiences that they were expressing. For your second question, doctor, we saw that this is a mix of hospital and community, since we did have informants that come from hospital settings, and we also had informants that come from private organizations that primarily catered to the community. And
go ahead.
They were also able to express in their individual narratives. The number is quite a lot, if I can say. So they've had a lot of experiences dealing with different kinds of sexual assault patients. They've had experiences with children, women, and even men, teenagers most of the time.
Thank you for that, Kent. And I guess my last question has to do with, can you therefore say, after listening to the stories and narratives of your respondents, that training for this particular competency or skill to be able to support sexually assaulted persons in the nursing curriculum is sufficient? Or are you saying that there has to be extra particular training to be able to guide them? Of course, from your articulation, using the lived experiences, you brought it full circle in the sense that you're saying that they found coping mechanisms. But if I were translate this into future use, are you saying that the training that you undergo as nurses are sufficient to equip future nursing and health professionals to accompany and assist sexually assaulted persons?
Thank you for that question, Doctor. So I believe that the training we do have is sufficient, but then there's always something that we can improve on with the training that is provided. Because with these nurses, they're not really called sexual assault nurse examiners. That is just a borrowed term from different countries that have the same kind of study. But I do believe that there is still something that can be improved with our nursing curriculum, with the trainings and programs that we provide our nurses to be able to handle sexually assaulted patients. So I do think that, yes, we are sufficient, but then there is still much more that we can improve on with the quality of care that we provide our patients.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Yap. Dr. Saniel.
Hello, thank you very much, Kent, for the very interesting research, and it's very different from the others because of its qualitative nature. That's why it's difficult for me now, to assess your study side by side with the rest. But anyway, I have a comment for you. I think it should be helpful. Please take note that your study is one qualitative study or one qualitative research. And since one study, the scope is limited, the study population is limited, so we need to temper. No, parating yun yata yung role ko ngayong araw, no, to bring back the researchers to the ground and be realistic about what they know and what information their study is giving them. So the person or the institution that would best use your results would probably be the managers of health facilities that care for sexually assaulted or abused patients. And parang masyado ng parang ini-extend na natin kung aabot tayo kung saan pa, because kailangan mag-percolate muna yung idea. Kailangan makita muna nila, ma-appreciate nila is yung mga recommendations ba o yung findings mo would be applicable in their setting. So wag nating madaliin because we need more information. Hayaan nating mag-mature yung topic. Yun lamang. And thank you and congratulations.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Seniel. And lastly, we have Dr. Gloria.
Thank you, Mr. Garapan, and congratulations as well to you and your team. Really appreciate that we have a qualitative study embedded among the finalists, and do appreciate the diversity of all the fields represented among our finalists. Especially thank you, Mr. Garapan and team, for doing research on something that's not only very important, but also very difficult to do. And having to do that on Zoom or Facebook Messenger, I can imagine it's much more difficult as well, speaking on such challenging topics like that. It was hard for me to formulate questions, really. I was really just so engaged in learning about the narrative and the learned experiences. I'm impressed with how much information you've managed to collect and organize into themes and sub-themes. I have to say, Mr. Garapan, I sort of got lost and buried in all of the themes and sub-themes, one slide after another. So perhaps what I could recommend, which is also easier said than done, is if you might be able to later on, when you consider publishing this, if you haven't already, putting this on some kind of summary table, so that all of the different themes and sub-themes and implications and recommendations are all in one, perhaps giant table, which would really, very well summarize and paint that picture. Interestingly, similar to a comment said by one of the fellow judges to another presenter who primarily did quantitative research, and we thought maybe we could complement them with qualitative research, I would actually recommend perhaps consider the same for you. You've gathered a lot of wonderful information qualitatively, and perhaps to respond to one of the judges' questions as well is maybe there's an avenue here, an opportunity to include some quantitative research so we could see how often, how frequently, who's being affected, and just get some numbers to make sense of it all holistically. The only questions I had, really, you already sort of indirectly responded with your many recommendations and broad stroke recommendations practically to every stakeholder involved in society and in public health. And so I guess my more practical short-term question for you, sorry, this was a long context, Mr. Garapan, what do you and your team plan on doing as your immediate next steps now that you've concluded this study?
Well, we first have to get this study published first. We do plan, I'm not sure if there is any plan within the research team if we were to do anything else with the study, but we are planning on publishing our study after we have completed our reviews. So we could focus more on the publishing of our study.
Thank you. Any next studies that you might be thinking about to continue moving this forward?
Yes, I actually do want to gather more information, and especially with your recommendation, Doctor, that we could infuse or perform quantitative so that we can actually see how many people are affected by this phenomenon. So thank you.
Thank you. And so my last comment briefly is you've said it earlier in your presentation about things we could learn from other professions like in social work and in the police workforce who often experience these kinds of cases and victims. And so consider that and learning from other professions who might be able to provide a lot of insight so you don't have to necessarily start from scratch. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, judges and Mr. Garapan. Our last presenter for today will be Mr. Joseph Benjamin B. Remolacho. Mr. Remolacho led the group whose objective was to investigate the need for face shields when the decision was made for their mandatory use. They have chosen the topic when it was still in effect, citing the cumbersome nature of its use and restriction in further ventilation. With the ruling lifted, focus shifted to other facial PPEs such as masks and goggles, and were assessed with the face shields to see their
not only
effectiveness
in
clearly.
research, but in other
Today,
aspects of daily lives.
today, he will present their study titled Effectiveness of the Different Facial Protective Equipment Against Aerosol Transmitted Pathogens, a Laboratory Demonstration Model. Mr. Remolacho, your 15 minutes starts now.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everyone that is present today. So the recent COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the need for health workers and common individuals, common citizens like us to be wearing increasing levels of personal protective equipment in order to prevent pathogen transmission. Um, however, as stated, uh, there are questions in mind about the effectivity of some of these equipment, like the face shields and the goggles, who were, as of recently with the Omicron variants outbreak, were considered for use, but again, those were questionable. And with those questions in mind, we have conducted the study entitled, next slide please, the effectiveness of the different facial protective equipment against aerosol transmitted pathogens, a laboratory demonstration model. You may move on. So the objectives of the study was to determine if there are differences in the levels of protection among combinations of facial protective equipment, such as, namely, face masks, face shields, and goggles. So we have assessed the bacterial growths in media without any facial PPE and those with PPE, and those combinations being the face mask only, the face shield only, goggles only, and face mask and face shield, face mask and goggles, face shield and goggles, and all three combined. Next slide, please. For our methodology, we performed the laboratory simulation here in our laboratory, sterilized and air contamination tested with a mechanical apparatus that I will further discuss, that is enclosed in a plastic air sealed containment cube about 2 meters in length and width and about 1.2 meters in height. Data utilized from the samples were taken from swabbing a sterile cling wrap around mannequin heads with a bacterial suspension being circulated by an air pump. Again, the details of that mechanism will be discussed a little further. The swabs were inoculated in distilled water and incubated for 24 hours at 35 degrees Celsius. And then the cell density was measured using a spectrophotometer at an optical density of 600 nanometers, and the results were recorded and analyzed. The suspension was Staphylococcus epidermidis, and we obtained that from a laboratory source. We prepared a 24-hour culture, and we suspended it in sterile distilled water. Moving forward, please. Here is the schematic diagram of procedures. From phase 1, the room preparation, we performed air contamination tests on the room to ensure that, aside from constructing the cube later in phase 2, we would ensure that the room was clean enough that there wouldn't be any contaminants flowing around when we performed the simulation. I have already mentioned the cube. It was constructed using PVC piping and plastic sheeting, 2 meters in width, 2 meters in length, and 1.2 meters in height. Phase 3 was setting up the breathing machine, which was a 9-kilogram oxygen tank attached to an air pump, which was also attached to a nebulizing capsule, which holds the Staphylococcus epidermidis suspension. And then the mannequins were set 1.5 meters away from the breathing mechanism in a row of 3. In phase 4, so the Staphylococcus epidermidis was obtained from a laboratory source and sent to our laboratory. Moving on to phase 5. A little bit of a side note, we encountered a lockdown in our region, in our city, so we could not exactly perform our simulation according to the timeline as it is. So there was a bit of a gap from obtaining the culture from the Staph epidermidis culture to starting the simulation, but at least we kept the Staphylococcus epidermidis alive and in their nutrient source mother tube. So before starting our simulations, the inoculum had to be prepared 1 by 1 per trial and per replication. We had 8 treatments with 3 replications each. So we had to perform preparations 24 times because the inoculum only had a 15-minute validity before the inoculum itself, the cell density would naturally double. Our reference for that, by the way, is the McFarland standard 0.5, and our source indicates later on, it will be in the paper, indicates a 0.063 cell density. So phase 6, with running the simulation and with the inoculum prepared, the mannequin heads were cling wrapped, and then the PPE combinations were worn on them, and the breathing machine was run for 10 seconds. After 10 seconds, the PPE were removed and then the heads were swabbed. To note that it is a full facial swab and it's not only the facial orifices like the nose and the mouth. In phase 7, we now take those swabs and inoculate them in sterile distilled water, and we incubated them for 24 hours at 35 degrees Celsius. Afterwards, the cell density in phase 8 were analyzed using a spectrophotometer at an optical density of 600 nanometers, and we analyzed the results. Moving on, here is the diagram of the breathing machine. You can see the air pump, the funnel, and the nebulizing capsule, and the oxygen tank attached to it as well. 1.5 meters. Our measurement was social distancing related. And moving on. Thank you. This is what it looked like itself with the breathing machine here on the left and the mannequin heads on the right. Moving ahead. So the disposal of those colonies, the used PPE, were handled according to the Staphylococcus epidermidis biosafety level, which was according to the USCDC. Used plates and tubes were soaked in bleach. We washed them with soap and then we autoclaved them. Appropriate PPE was worn at all times. We wore isolation gowns, gloves, and a full 3M style rebreather kit. The room was disinfected with Lysol after each use and finally deep cleaned after the simulations were completed with Lysol and industrial cleaning agents. Moving forward. Okay, so table 1, with this table, these are the mean cell densities of the trials, of the replications. So these are the means. We have 8 treatments with 3 trials each. So these are, again, the means. Treatment number 0 is the McFarland standard, of which I have aforementioned had a 0.063 approximate cell density, which was acceptable with our source, with our journal source. To note that treatment number 1 with all the PPE had the lowest cell density at 0.016. The second with mask and face shield had 0.21. The third, goggles and mask, 0.218. Goggles and face shield at 0.192. Face shield only at 0.242. Mask at 0.232. Goggles at 0.219. And of course, with none, 0.244 is the highest. So with the letters beside the means, if they are followed by the same letter, they are not significantly different from each other. So to note that only treatment 1 is the most significant from the rest of them, while noting that from treatments 2 to 7, at least 2 to 7 are not so significantly different from each other, suggesting that there may not be an increasingly beneficial or non-beneficial benefit from adding a face mask, adding a face shield, or adding goggles. And on top of that, using just a face mask is not as significantly different as using a face mask with a face shield. So carrying on, the 3 mannequins were exposed as receivers. The cell density was measured at 600 nanometers, and the average tests yielded from 0.16 from treatment 1 and 0.244 with treatment 8. Interestingly, as I have mentioned, the rest of the treatments 2 through 7 had values that were not significantly different from each other, suggesting that, as I have mentioned, the variation in levels of protection may not be entirely beneficial or non-beneficial. Moving on. Conclusions and recommendations. The most effective combination of facial protective equipment uses all 3 of them, all 3 of the PPEs, the face mask, the face shield, and the goggles, as it's shown that it has the least average turbidity. However, face shields are not exactly advisable for use unless under the discretion of the local health authorities, which they may still be enforced, as we have shown in the previous table that using a face mask is not entirely different from using a face mask with a face shield. And to note that residual airflow, the airflow that has not direct in front of the face shield, has not been accounted for, that plays a significant part in the intrusion of pathogens through the sides and under and over the face shield. The environmental impact of the face shields has also not been assessed or studied by this. Moving on. The benefactors of the use of face shields are medical professionals, industrial workers, and other workers exposed to occupational hazards that may splash onto the face and eyes. Again, not on the grounds of any additional safety in inhaling other hazards, as I have mentioned, the lingering air particles, the residual airflow of intrusion that may be redisturbed. Based on the findings, the sole use of face shields is not sufficient enough as protection against aerosol transmitted pathogens. You may still need to, you have to still use a face mask to prevent inhaling those pathogens. This study showed that the best way to prevent aerosol transmitted pathogens was to use all of the PPE available. Forward. The human quality of life aspect was not assessed, but should be analyzed in future research, especially with regard to the use of face shields. As I have mentioned, the lingering air particles and aerosols were not considered for this simulation, but it should make more sense when dealing with face shields, because face shields use are more effective with the direct, short burst, direct contact transmission of aerosols. And with next slide, please. With these recommendations, health workers should wear complete facial protective equipment more frequently, especially in hospitals or in closed facilities, wherein they are in contact with different aerosol pathogens, and that also when patients sneeze, when patients cough, they don't just directly go into the airs. It may settle, and it may also be redisturbed when people move, when air gets blown in. And second, it must be an established protocol in hospital setting, but not only in a hospital setting, but generally for the Department of Health, to wear complete facial protective equipment for better prevention of aerosol transmitted pathogens. For future researchers, they may also assess the length of use and when should an individual replace it, and should consider comparing face masks, goggles, and face shields to full biological hazmat suits, as well as those different kinds of face masks, different kinds of goggles, and different kinds of face shields. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Remolasio, for sharing your study with us. The floor is now open for questions from our judges. Let us first hear the questions of Dr. Saniel, followed by Dr. Gloria and Dr. Yap. Dr. Saniel, the floor is yours po.
Yes, thank
Dr. Saniel?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes po, loud and clear.
Yeah, yes. Okay, so Joseph, well, the study is very interesting. You know very well that the face shields, the wearing of face shields has been an issue. And the National Task Force had was always faced with questions, no, because politicians and even some doctors actually challenge the effectiveness or the necessity of using face shields. Well, just a comment because when we're doing research, let us always also keep in mind, yung practical realities. You have, hindi, kasi madali talagang kayo ng ginawa, face mask only, Googles only, etc. But in reality, hindi naman tayo, at least ang National Task Force or DOH, said na mag-face shield ka lang or goggles ka lang. Right? So essentially mask is always there. No, so it's a combination of mask and face shields and mask and goggles. So tipong well siguro ang my point here is you could have save yourself energy by only testing or choosing those really which is viable, no? Siguro ewan ko lang if that's the case, if I ask you, Joseph, alin ang maite-test mo kung gusto mong maging realistic as well? Alin lang doon sa ano yung mga ang ite-test mo?
Hello, can I be heard po ba?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, yes, Doc, for what I would like to choose to make it a bit more realistic would be the face mask and the face shield only compared with the face mask, just the face mask.
So walang combination?
Oh, the combination, the face mask and face shield po. And realistically, since we are not, the use of face shields is no longer required versus only face masks.
Well, you can still, test whether face shield and masks, would protect better, a little bit better, I don't know, versus mask only. In other words, yung pipiliin natin na sabi ko nga, would be the, yung realistic choices. And you know very well that the issue being raised against use of face shields cost and very inconvenient. So kaya because it's inconvenient to use, compliance is very poor. So yun ang pagpili ng especially kung ikaw ay it will cost some money na magdadamihan mo yung treatment arms mo, then you can just reduce your choices or your treatment arms to the more realistic combinations or choices. So yun lang yung aking when we make recommendations, hindi natin pwedeng ihiwalay yung science behind it plus yung science and yung cost implications, economy, compliance, etc. Sige, thank you, Joseph, and congratulations.
Thank you po, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Saniel. Dr. Gloria.
Thank you, Mr. Ramon Lacio, to you and your team for conducting such timely and relevant and controversial research project. not only in the context of the Philippines, but the whole world watching whether the methods that the nation had employed would be better or worse for one reason or another. I completely echo and agree with Dr. Saniel's feedback about weighing the pros and the cons between the clinical statistical significance with the reality when we it's sort of comparing the efficacy versus the effectiveness in the real world, right? And so I want to also share my appreciation for being holistic about your approach and being mindful of the economic, the environmental factors, the quality of life. And Dr. Sanyel mentioned about when all of those are considered, compliance is also affected. And so when we compare clinical to reality, the effectiveness might be very different, for better or worse, in the real world. You answered some of my questions in your presentations about the direction of the wind or the distance being very constant, which is not really what we expect to see in the real world. And so I guess my question for you, Dr. or Mr. Remolacio, very quickly in with respect to time, knowing what you know altogether, including all of the factors that you mentioned into the equation: economy, convenience, quality of life, environment, the fact that people may reuse masks and goggles and shields because they might not have the ability to afford all of those disposably. At the end of the day, if a community member or a community leader came up to you based on your presentation, what would you recommend in terms of all of the possible combinations?
Realistically, sir. So now we are considering the realism with affordability and all that. Based on our data and the data that we have seen, and from, well, I'm not sure if I can say personal experience, because part of this research was considered me living outside of the Philippines where face shields were not required. I would really recommend to just use a face mask, a disposable surgical face mask, if it can be if it can be purchased. And I'm not sure if any barangay, any local government are giving away face masks to their constituents, but locally mine does. So that would be a good recommendation, the surgical mask.
Great, thank you. I'll turn the mic over to Dr. Yap.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you. So hello, Joseph. Adding in my congratulations, I would surmise that this particular work, when you were doing it, was still in the thick of the controversies and the different policies. That's why I'm guessing that was the reason why you took in all of these protective equipment. But actually, my question is very similar to what Dr. Saniel and Dr. Gloria have asked, because to be honest, I'm particularly involved right now assisting the Department of Health with a so-called pandemic playbook. And part of this actually is done in coordination also with the National Economic Development Authority, where they also need to be able to forecast investments that are needed to make the country more resilient for any, hopefully not, but for any coming epidemics and pandemics, so that we're not scrambling for PPE and all of that. So I heard you say that perhaps the best investment or preparations to be made have to do with face masks. Let me just push it a bit and ask you, because I think one of the things that came out very strongly in your paper had to do with health workers. And I would assume that these are the health professionals who are attending to perhaps more serious cases in the hospitals. And for this, can I ask you again, what would you emphasize? Because as you know, our hospitals, both public and private, they're not awash with cash, and they need to be able to find out what are the appropriate personal protective equipment that they ought to wear. Are you saying, therefore, that what they're doing now, or at least hazmat level, is really what it should be based on your study? Joseph?
Thank you for that question, Doc. But we are not, realistically, again, that we are not exactly like Qatar or the United Arab Emirates that are really strapped for cash, um, it's not exactly advisable to just keep using hazmat because that is expensive. So it's best that we use, well, I'm not the only one that's going to recommend it. It's best that we use the appropriate kinds of isolation gowns and these type of N95 masks, and especially with health workers, as I have mentioned, because with the serious cases of like COVID, that the patients cough or sneeze, those are direct contact that are very good, that face shields are very good at protecting against. So it's only appropriate for the kind of level of spending that we have, really. So it would be just making compromises.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess the thing to say here is to tweak a bit this study to say that these findings may be contributory somehow more for how non-health professionals or people in the streets should be protected, and maybe not so much into emphasizing what ought and ought not ought to be worn by health professionals. I mean, it's just a realization based on how you answered. But thank you for that. Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you very much, judges and Mr. Remolacho. And that concludes the 6 research presentations today. Delivering findings from your research to a general audience is truly challenging given the time limit and the burden of representing your region. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us commend and appreciate the efforts of our 6 finalists with a big round of virtual applause. We will have a 10-minute break to allow our judges to deliberate. Judges, you will be asked to move to a breakout room for the deliberation. After which, we will proceed with the awarding of certificates and the announcement of our winners. While we are on a break, may we request everyone to please answer our evaluation form by clicking the link provided in the chat box or by scanning the QR code flashed on your screens. Only participants who have successfully submitted their accomplished evaluation forms will be given an electronic copy of their certificate of participation. Just a reminder, please make sure to input your name and email address correctly. The e-certificates will be sent to your emails within 10 working days after the program. If you didn't receive your e-certificates after 10 working days, please email your complete name together with a proof of submission of the evaluation form to dost3rdsmeeting@gmail.com. Again, the email is dost3rdsmeeting@gmail.com. Also, please be informed that we will only accept evaluation until 5 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you, and we will see you in a moment. Thank you for patiently waiting. We have now come to the most awaited part of this activity, the awarding of the winners. But before we proceed with the announcement, let us first award the certificates of appreciation to our Board of Judges. Please allow me to read the citation. The Philippine National Health Research System and the Central Luzon Health Research and Development Consortium awards this certificate of appreciation to Dr. Christian T. Gloria, Dr. Maria Eufemia C. Yap, and Dr. Ofelia P. Saniel for sharing their knowledge and insight as judges in the oral research paper presentation student category during the 15th PNHRS Week celebration held on August 8 to 12, 2022 at the Clark Marriott Hotel, Clark Freeport Zone, Pampanga. Given this 9th of August at Clark Freeport Zone, Pampanga. Signed, Dr. Jaime C. Montoya, Lead Coordinator, PNHRS and Executive Director, PCHRD. And Dr. Julius Cesar V. Sicat, Chair, CLHRDC, and Regional Director, DOST3. A warm round of virtual applause to our Board of Judges. And to award the certificates of participation to our finalists, let me read the citation. The Philippine National Health Research System and the Central Luzon Health Research and Development Consortium awards this certificate of participation to Ms. Maydel Joyce B. Castro, Ms. Hazel Faith N. Pelpinosas, Ms. Princess Jewel V. Guzman, Ms. Geraldine Joy G. Corpus, Mr. Kent Lance Garapan, and Mr. Joseph Benjamin B. Remolacio for generously sharing their ideas and research studies as finalists in the oral research paper presentation student category during the 15th PNHRS Week celebration held on August 8 to 12, 2022 at the Clark Marriott Hotel, Clark Freeport Zone, Pampanga. Given this 9th of August at Clark Freeport Zone, Pampanga, signed Dr. Jaime C. Montoya, Lead Coordinator PNHRS and Executive Director PCHRD, and Dr. Julius Cesar V. Sicat, Chair CLHRDC and Regional Director DOST3. A warm round of virtual applause to all our finalists. Okay. Since this is a virtual activity, your certificates will be sent to your respective email address after the event. To proceed with the awarding, let me reiterate that the winners will be receiving a certificate and cash prize, while the other finalists will receive a consolation prize of 5,000 pesos in recognition of their efforts. All right, without further ado, it is my pleasure to announce the winners for this year's oral research paper presentation student category. Okay, our third placer will receive a certificate and a cash prize of 10,000 pesos. Okay? Congratulations to our third placer. Okay. Congratulations to Miss Hazel Faith and Pelpinosas for the study, a type of SEIR model with a large set of undetected asymptomatic with short and long-term COVID-19 dynamics to better comprehend vaccination, immunity, and treatment. Congratulations, Ms. Pelpinosas. Now, for our second placer, who will also receive a certificate and a cash prize of 15,000 pesos. Congratulations to Congratulations, Ms. Maydel Joyce B. Castro for the study titled CovFirm, a web browser plugin for COVID-19 vaccine false information detection. Okay, congratulations, Ms. Castro and the rest of the research team. Okay, so ito na ang pinakahihintay ng lahat. The champion will receive a certificate and a cash prize of 20,000 pesos. This year's champion in the oral research paper presentation student category goes to Congratulations to Miss Princess Jewel V. Guzman for the study titled Practices and Challenges of Antimicrobial Stewardship Among Pharmacists in Selected Community and Hospital Pharmacies in Bacolod City. Okay, so congratulations to all our winners and also to all our finalists. Let us give everyone a big round of virtual applause. Okay. So our PNHRS Secretariat will get in touch with you soon regarding your prizes. We hope that everyone will continue their research journey and be able to utilize the results of your studies into outputs that will contribute to the improvement of the health and well-being of Filipinos. And to officially close today's activity, may I call on the Medical Officer 5 of the Department of Health, Central Luzon Center for Health Development, Dr. Maria Eloisa C. Vidar. Dr. Vidar. Okay, so let's wait po for Dr. Vidar. There seems to be a short technical difficulties po. Dr. Vidar.
Hello, sir.
Hello po.
Hello. Am I coming in clear? I'm so sorry.
Yes po,
Okay,
Dr.
so-
Vidar, loud and clear.
So at this point in time, we'd like to again say a pleasant morning to everyone for all of us in this virtual platform. Thank you all for joining us, and congratulations to all who have presented this morning, as well as specifically to our winners. Congratulations! But of course, you all did well. And again, acknowledgement to all our judges, our members of the ones who assisted us today with our presentations. Those are Dr. Saniel, Dr. Siap and Dr. Gloria. So thank you po for all of your insights. So you have for generously sharing your insights and as well as how they can further improve on their papers. And this morning we hear discussions that some are like yesterday, some are on the technical level, but then again, we are still truly inspired and motivated. I hope all of us will still continue to pursue whatever genre of research we are into, and all of us will likewise engage and continue to engage in doing researches, similar researches that can contribute to responding to the country's health concerns. So, like what I said, although some of the discussions were technical, as mentioned by our panelists, we all know that all of these technical things they can be potentially be valuable to us, and they are more significant once they become a health product or maybe something that contributes to policies and guidelines that we can use in the Department of Health that contributes or which members of the community can really benefit from. And finally, congratulations to the team that worked on this research presentation, our consortium, and the PCHRD for supporting this to continue to hold the similar presentations in all of the PNHRS activities. So again, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat, and we still hope that you can join us tomorrow until the end of the week as we continue to give you more of what we have in the country in terms of research. Thank you once again, everyone, for judges, panelists, and all the committees who are working on this oral research presentation, whether they are of a student category and professional category. Good morning once again sa ating lahat.
Thank you, Dr. Vidor, for your message. And that officially concludes the 15th PNHRS Week Oral Research Paper Presentation Student Category. We sincerely thank our finalists, judges, and audience who are with us virtually. Be sure to check out other activities by visiting the 15th PNHRS Week website at 15th PNHRS Week celebration.dost3.ph and the official Facebook page of DOST PCHRD for more information on our upcoming activities. Again, I am Rafael Enrique G. Chonco, your moderator for this activity. Thank you very much. God bless and stay safe.